All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and I want to say thank you so very much yesterday for Ralph and his Bigfoot encounter interview from Washington State up on the Skycomish River. That was awesome. It was great, and I hope you can watch that. It's the video just before this one, so you can check that out. Also wanted to give a shout out to I Know It's Your Email, Brown Dwarf, the winner of the book this month. And also I decided to pick a second winner, and Keith out in Ireland. So these things will be heading out this next week to you. Monday or Tuesday they'll be mailed out. My wife will personally take them down there, send them off to you. Anyways, I want to say thank you guys very much. God bless you for being here. Let me take a little sip of this awesome Sasquatch coffee. Also, some of you guys have been asking some of my favorite flavors over there at Sasquatch Coffee, and I have to tell you, I really like Treenock and Skookum. Those are pretty awesome. So if you want, go ahead, grab yourself a bag of that. I love it. So, okay, with that, here is this week's encounter story, and we are going to start that right now. Fly fisherman watches Bigfoot. Watch him near McCloud River, and then follows him. This one, just so you know, I absolutely love this one. This one is actually a first-hand account told to me, so here we are. I took up fly fishing about 3 years ago. One of my favorite spots to fish was where the Claiborne Creek runs into the McCloud River in Northern California, but not anymore, not since I ran into Bigfoot there. My encounter and sighting actually lasted nearly 15 minutes or so. I know that is a long time to be around such an enormous and scary animal or creature, but that is what happened. Here's my encounter, and if I were you, I would always bring a gun or at least bear spray when you go fishing in the woods of Northern California. I know I do today. The creek. I'm a longtime California resident, Northern California for sure. I have fished every lake, river, creek, and stream from the Nevada border to the coastline. Of all that time out in the woods, fishing or camping, I never saw anything like I had that day near the McCloud River. Actually, I was fishing down a creek called the Claiborne. And while I will get into the sighting and experience in just a moment, I do want you to know a little bit about the surroundings here and the fact that up until that day, I never really believed in the Bigfoot thing. Up until that day, I'd never even found a footprint or felt weird or uncomfortable out and about fishing or camping anywhere, and that includes growing up in Wisconsin before I moved out here to Northern California. The area, if you are familiar with here, you'd know is mountainous and full of low-lying hills as well. They are also rather steep. In some places it's all but cliff around the part of the river and creek I was at that day. However, there are some decent, more level areas along the edge of the river and along the creek. Well, trails and a beach are area that led back and forth from the river, more like it. That day I decided to hike up the creek about a couple hundred yards or so. There were some large areas that seemed more like pools you would find in a river. However, this was a creek, and the fishing had always been great there that time of year. The forest on both sides ran up steep hills and mountainsides thick with tall bushes and pine trees of every kind stood limb to limb, all of this creating darkness 30 to 40 yards in that was all but impenetrable for light. That morning was great. It was warm already, partly cloudy, but no rain was called for. It would be a morning of great fishing. The plan was to be out there all day and into the early evening. I unpacked the car of my fishing gear and a large backpack full of food and water. And yes, I brought a few beers to stick in the cold water and drink throughout the day. I know some of you might think that bad, but come on, it's just a few beers. It was a longer walk than I was used to, or remember. Maybe it was all the stuff I was carrying that made it longer and more arduous than usual. Either way, I was tired by the time I got to the larger pools, but that was not going to stop me from getting some fishing. Done. fly fishing and strange noises upstream. The morning started off great, actually. It was warm, like I said. I was already up 3 fish caught and thrown back. Most of the day would be mostly catch and release, but of course, if I caught Walter, I would string him up. The water was quiet on this part of the creek, and because it was still near the river, it was almost like a small river itself instead of some creek that was decided upon. But the water was not loud and rushing. All was rather quiet, well, until I heard what I thought were coyotes at first. It came from up the creek. It sounded like it had to be at least a couple 100 yards away, or possibly more. But then again, this is a canyon-like area, so it could have been closer. It was like a whine of a coyote, not quite the call or howl of one, but more like a whining cry of one. So that is what I believed it to be. Coyote acting like a coyote, I supposed. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. After about a few minutes of the whining, it stopped. Everything went back to normal. I even noticed for a moment the birds were chirping again. Weird. I never noticed it at first, at the time, but even they went quiet when the noise was going on. I was not scared, though. Not at that point. Like I said, I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and when I camp, sometimes I do not bring a tent. A sleeping bag, cooking supplies, gun, and a fishing pole is all I need. My wife thinks I'm crazy for doing it, but I like roughing it, really roughing it. And just so you know, since I have not mentioned it, we have no kids. My wife and I, well, she was unable, and our income level kept us from adopting. So it was just me out there that day, and usually camping as well, as my wife is more of a homebody. I went back to fishing, and for about another hour, it was great once again. The fish were biting, the first beer was great, and the rain was not to be that day. But an hour later, things became quiet once again. This time I was aware of the absence of the sound of birds, chipmunks, and other small and well-known critters of the forest around here. It was at that point that my mind had been changed on the subject of Bigfoot. They do exist. That day, the unbelievable and unknown became known. Grunts and whoops. Like I said, the side of the creek I was on was a rather flat area with steep hillsides about 30 yards behind me. As a matter of fact, because of flooding from time to time, the area I was in was also all but void of brush or standing trees. It was just low brush and deadfall. I could see across to the other side of the hill, but beyond that was thick Pacific Northwest forests. As a matter of fact, this whole area is surrounded by the Modoc, Sixes, Lassen, and Shasta Trinity National Forest. It is a thick vegetation here, so visibility into and up the hillside was almost impossible. I could see about 20 or so yards in, but that was it. And when the clouds would pass in front of the sun, well, it was pitch black inside and visibility was nil. It started with a whoop sound. I have since this time read and heard recordings of and have come to believe it is both a communication practice between them and a possible warning to us, people, that they are present. But that last part is my best guess. I looked over my shoulder, and again from the right and up the hill I heard another whoop. This time the sound was louder, and I could tell it was directed at me. I don't know why it did, but it just seemed like it. I sat my fishing pole down and took a few steps to the right as well, and that is when I noticed some movement as the sun shined down onto the forest floor. Whatever it was seemed to have moved behind some brush and trees, but I did see it move. I could not at that point tell what it was, personally. I was thinking elk or deer, maybe a small black bear, but I did not know. I only saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I picked up my fishing pole and decided I would get back to fishing, but at that moment I heard a grunt of some kind. Bear? Coyote? Was it a mountain lion? Whatever it was made a grunt, and I was not familiar with any known animal out here that grunts other than a bear, perhaps. However, this grunt came down off the hillside, and once again, I felt as though it was directed at me. The hair on my neck started to stand on end at that point, and an uncomfortable feeling started to come over me. Well, I hated the fact it was time to go. I might as well be safe than sorry. Besides, I could drive a few miles down the river and fish somewhere else. It took me about 10 minutes to get everything packed up and ready to go. And during that time, I heard another grunt sound coming from the hillside. The clouds had passed over, and this time I could not see a darn thing past a few yards or so into the woods up there, packing lightly and moving quickly. I had at least 200 yards to walk out of here to the river and another 50 yards to my car from there. Although I was packed a bit heavier that day, for the most part at least, I began moving quickly along the trail, easy enough. The only problem was, just getting started had put me closer to where the grunts came from than I would have liked. But, hair on my neck or not, I had to go. I ended up getting around a small bend, putting that section behind me quickly, and before me was a pretty straight stretch leading to the river. However, the next thing I knew, I noticed movement again out of the corner of my eye, just up the hillside in the trees. I stopped for a moment to look, and that is when I saw a large, dark brown figure walk, and I mean bipedal walking, from one large tree to behind some others and a rocky outcrop. My heart almost exploded. That was not a person. That was a giant animal, monster, whatever, walking and literally paralleling me. At that moment, another grunt came from whatever that thing was, and this time, however, it was followed by a seriously creepy growl. I started moving faster now, not fast enough to set this thing off, hopefully, but enough to get me back to the river faster. At least there I could dive in the river if needs be and get away faster in the current. My mind was spinning as I walked on. Bigfoot? That kept playing in my mind. This thing was massive, walked on two legs I could see, and was covered in dark brown hair. It was minutes later that my conclusions about what it would be found to be correct. I kept walking, and as I did, I could hear the thing move above me, about 30 or 40 yards at most, also walking, or more like crashing through the woods, still paralleling me. And I picked up the pace. The river is my refuge. I could see the river, although it was still about 50 yards out. I could see it nonetheless, though. All I had to do now was get around one more bend. This would put me closer to the thing following me again, but there was no other way. There was too much debris, low brush, and rock to walk closer to the creek. It would slow me down, actually. I was now close to the tree line at that point, and that is when the second scariest part of my trek back would happen. Whoa! The scream must have been about 40 yards away, but it felt like it was right in front of me. I felt the vibrations move through me so hard, so violently, that I almost tripped and fell. I kept my footing, though, barely. I stopped, caught my breath, and looked back up towards the trees, and once again the figure ran with great speed from one tree to another. It also looked as though it was coming closer to me, like it was going to cut me off before the river. I started moving faster, and before I knew it, I noticed movement not 20 yards away. I stopped in my tracks, and so did it. I looked to the left only to see something I had no idea or reference for. Bigfoot. It was dark brown, darker than I thought earlier. It was not fur either. It was like long hair. I could hear it breathing from that close. It was taking in and letting out deep and raspy breaths. Its face is what caught me off guard, as well as the fact that it had breasts. I was staring at something that looked like a creature I had seen on a film once, one made not too far away from here, the Patty film. It looked just like that. However, I was seeing this thing without the blur and shaking, well, other than my hands at that moment. I remember its eyes. Besides its chest and long arms, its eyes were not beady as I have heard some state. As a matter of fact, They had almost human quality to them, and I could make out that they had whites to them. They were large, human-like, and I could sense they were, well, by the way they were set, she was angry, mad, or ready to eat me. I stopped looking at her, this beast of a thing, and started walking again. This time, however, I kept my eyes to the ground, my ears wide open. I could still hear her following me, although she never seemed to come any closer than that moment we looked at each other. She grunted, she whooped some more, and as I finally reached the river and larger path, she let out another scream that chilled me to the bone, and it was warm that morning. I looked back over my shoulder one more time as I noticed the walking, or better yet, the paralleling of me by this Bigfoot had stopped. It was still standing. She was still standing there, not in the open though, but halfway behind a tree. I did not stare at this time, but I did see her that one last time. I turned down the larger trail and out of sight. I have never ever been that frightened in my life, and trust me, I have been in some hairy situations, no pun intended, in the Middle East while serving in the military. Fishing McCloud today. I do not wander up the Claiborne Creek like I used to. Then again, I am older now, and that hike is just a little too much for me anyways. However, I did want to share my story, as I never hear people talk much about seeing female Bigfoot. I still think about that face today, and to be honest, it makes me shudder a bit to know that these animals are out here, in the woods, all around us, and we don't even know it. I'm not scared or frightened enough to not go fishing today and up the McCloud River. I just don't go there, to the Claiborne, ever. Thanks.